Well, I've probably talked about The Legend of Spyro long enough. Now, it's about time I moved on to the original trilogy. Basically, I've always thought that I didn't have too much to add with Insomniac's PS1 titles. I might go out on a limb and say that everything that's needed to be said has already been said. However, one question stands out to me. Has the original Spyro the Dragon aged well? While Insomniac's PS1 classic is still beloved by most, there are some that argue that its mechanics haven't stood the test of time, that its focus on collecting is derivative and it becomes tedious after a while. Ultimately, there are two camps. There's a side that says Spyro the Dragon's gameplay has a form of purity that makes it atmospheric and even fun in its own simplicity. Others will complain about how boring the collecting is and how the gameplay feels too limiting because it'll only have you doing one thing. So where do I stand in all of this? Has Spyro the Dragon's old age kept it from joining the same heights as something like Abe's Odyssey, Soulstorm, or does it still manage to be a shining gem in the rough? Let's find out. So, as is already established, Spyro the Dragon is a 3D platformer collectathon. The main focus of the gameplay is collecting gems and freeing dragons while traversing an open world. Now, as was common with quite a few 3D platformers in the 90s, the story wasn't meant to be taken too seriously. Sure, maybe games like Ape Escape had a story that had more of a presence, but for the most part, they were generally on the simple side, and Spyro the Dragon was no different. Basically, the plot is that all the dragons spend so much time insulting this one guy named Nasty Nork that he gets pissed and freezes all the dragons in crystal. That is, except for Spyro, who now needs to go across the realms and free his friends while collecting the stolen dragon treasure that Nasty has mutated into his loyal minions. Pretty simple if you ask me. In a way, it does set up the stakes for the game. Like, there is some urgency in having a green fellow encase all of your relatives in statue and transform all the gems into his henchmen. But the narrative kind of disappears in the middle of the game, for most of the dragons just drop hints or thank you for releasing them. It's just the intro and outro cutscenes, so that leaves the characterization. The dragons don't really demonstrate a whole lot of personality. Maybe the most we get is them lamenting about how long they've been trapped, or how old they've gotten compared to Spyro.
This portal leads to a special place where you can learn to fly. I remember when I was a young dragon, earning my wings.
Learn to fly. Got it.
But for the most part, it's nothing to write home about. And that leaves us with Spyro, who's not voiced by Tom Kenny this time around, but Carlos Elizraki. He brings a brash, self-confident hero who's ready to dive into any kind of danger. He has a tendency to be impatient with his elders, and often has a keen desire to rush into things even when he's not fully prepared.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
Keep your horns on, Spyro. You have much to learn first. Do you know what the dragonfly following you is doing?
So in a lot of ways, Insomniac Games created a titular hero that the average teenager and kid can relate to, but considering that his role is so minor, it's not really worth too much of a discussion. There's no depth to the story, because there never was meant to be any. It's just meant to set up a background and purpose for the gameplay. Considering there were so many cutscenes with the dragons, maybe they could have done something with them such as have them assist Spyro in some way, or create a passageway to the next hub world, instead of relying so much on Marco the Balloonist. It would have been a lot better compared to them just saying,
"Thank you for releasing me."
But I digress. The gameplay is the real bread and butter. So a lot of people complain the original Spyro the Dragon is too milquetoast for lack of a better description. When looked at side by side with the original Crash Bandicoot, a lot of people cite how Crash has more action and was more fast-paced compared to the latter. But what they forget is that these two games had their own unique focus. For while Crash Bandicoot was about following a path and dodging obstacles, Spyro was more about exploring an open world to collect stuff. Therefore, the level designs have their own individual appeals based on what the core gameplay is about. As an example, a lot of the stages in Spyro concentrate on paying attention to subtle details in the area instead of testing your hand-eye coordination and mastering the timing of a jump. Spyro has to utilize his simple moveset of charging, breathing fire, and gliding in creative ways in order to snag difficult-to-get gems and dragons. Dry Canyon has one dragon atop an isolated cliff with several gems surrounding it. It might seem impossible to reach. However, you then realize there's a plateau that leads to nowhere if you glide straight. Curving your flight path, though, will take you right to the elusive platform to free the dragon Maximos.
Incredible glide, Spyro. I thought I'd be stuck here forever with those ugly vultures standing on my head.
Similarly, Spyro can climb up the exterior walls of the ruins in Misty Bog in the form of stairs. Trying to jump onto sides of the walls reveals that these ruins serve as more than just for architecture. Both of these instances involve Spyro thinking outside the box and studying the placement of certain featurettes into levels to find secret areas. While it's not quite action-packed, it's fun in a different way considering that every level is a puzzle to be solved to get all the collectibles. And trust me, you're gonna shoot for 120%. Each level lasts for only 5 minutes if you run straight through, so I'd probably say Spyro the Dragon is one of those rare games where there's a right way to play. I mean, you can go through the game without shooting for all the gems and dragons, but you won't be getting the full experience. But returning to the level designs, Spyro also gets special enhancements for his charge and flame breath, and these aren't just simple power-ups, for Spyro the Dragon goes out of its way to teach you how to use them skillfully through the means of the level design. Basically, instead of opting for a step-by-step tutorial seen in the beginning of most games, Spyro the Dragon places the player in different situations that forces them to use the power-up in an unconventional method. The first time you see the supercharge into magic crafters, the game teaches you how it can be used to break open impossible-to-destroy chests. Later in Wizard's Peak, there are several distant platforms in which a simple glide won't do. In order to reach this, Spyro has to combine the total velocity given by the 2 supercharge ramps in order to gain enough speed to propel him off the slope to reach said area. This helps him prepare for what he's about to face in Treetops, where he has to keep up with a thief, all the while trying to meander a twisted pathway of leaps and bounds through the numerous supercharge ramps in order to reach a dragon trapped way up on a tall platform. In all seriousness, Treetops is probably the best example of a level designed to be a puzzle. You really have to make a conceited effort to keep up with that thief in the beginning. Otherwise, figuring out how to get the more elusive gems and dragons will be confusing. This is where I lost the most amount of lives, struggling to solve what the game wanted me to do until it dawned on me that in the beginning I had to stay on the thief's trail so that he could guide me as to what ramps to go off of. You're gonna have to forgive me for my inadequacy. It's been a while. In the same manner, a Fairy Kiss can give Spyro Super Flame, although unlike what's seen in the sequels, this fire breath is mostly the same in design. The only difference is that it's used to destroy enemies that are immune to Spyro's normal flame and charge. The level High Caves features metalback spiders that can only be defeated with either one of the superior forms of Spyro's attacks. However, one section is blocked off with stairs, which prevents Spyro from using his supercharge because he just hit his head against a wall. I was puzzled with how to approach this until I realized I needed to quickly dispatch the wizard to get to the fairy in order for her to kiss me. Then, with the newly empowered Super Flame Breath, I could finally kill the bugs. In this case, the game is trying to present different circumstances for when to charge and when to use Fire Breath. Sure, there are enemies with armor or shields that indicate which attack to use on them, but here, the game is once again forcing the player to observe the surroundings of the level to correctly approach a situation. So in many ways, Spyro's gameplay is more than just tedious collecting. The level designs make the gathering of gems and dragons have more thought rather than just scattering them about. But there are times when you're running around and just can't find that last gem no matter how hard you look. That's where the atmosphere comes in to keep you busy as you search. And I'm not simply talking about Stuart Copeland's score. Copeland truly is a god when it comes to making music. However, his OST gets talked about a little too much. On the other hand, the enemy characteristics and mannerisms get overlooked, even though they add just as much to the fantasy-esque charm. In fact, I'd probably say they have more personality than the average characters in this game, and that's really saying something. In Wizard Peak, you can catch some of the armored druids talking to one another. Some of the ice Norks will try to smash them, with the druids dodging left and right as the Nork stupidly swings in the same place. In High Caves, a group of Elder Wizards will be dueling with a Tornado Sorcerer as if there were two factions that are warring with one another. It makes the enemies of this game feel like actual people over animatronic dummies you charge and flame. In the original Crash Bandicoot, the enemies merely went back and forth, back and forth, without any rhyme or reason. While the AI in Spyro has some other problems, little details like these make the enemies you fight more likable and actually do a lot to immerse you into the world the game is trying to create. And I've got to give it to the animation team in Insomniac. For 1998, these animations are spectacular. Whether it's the beast from Alpine Plains digging his feet into the ground, just waiting for you to come down from your perch so he could smash you, to the little Nork soldier shaking his ass at you, all these animations come together to create little perks that honestly prevented me from just going directly in for the kill. I mean, the Nork just jiggling his little ass in your face? While it may have been meant to be dirty, there's just something kind of cute about it, for lack of a better word. Ah, great, now it sounds like I have a thing for Norks. Overall, these enemies are gushing with character that the rest of the main cast just happens to be missing. However, not all of the atmospheric details are meant to complement the feel of the world. Sometimes, Insomniac found ways to incorporate this into the gameplay. For instance, the Dreamweaver's world is meant to convey a realm based on the unusual happenings within visions and, well, dreams. Therefore, a cannon will sometimes shrink and enlarge enemies, which forces the player to time their attacks of when to charge or flame. On the other hand, Dark Passage has several enemies that respond differently depending on whether the light is on or not. Again, this creates the atmosphere of a fantasy haunted house, especially when you have puppies and little turtles becoming monsters. But from a gameplay standpoint, it adds pressure to reach the lantern to keep it lit in order to leave the enemies vulnerable. So, in a way, it adds a third extra factor to evaluate, instead of simply flaming and charging like you did with all the other foes. However, having sung all the praise towards the enemies of this game, there is one specific type of enemy that Insomniac didn't get right, and those are the bosses. Or if you could even call them that. Most of the time you usually think of some hulking form that you need to take down in combat, but in Spyro the Dragon, yeah, I hesitate to even call these fights. More like lunatic embarrassments. Maybe Dr. Shemp and Blowhard introduced something interesting to the chases with flaming him in the back and dodging tornadoes, but most of these were pretty easy. The only one that posed a challenge was a Nasty Nork. Seriously, just fuck those things. Catching up to them was a real pain in the ass. And then trying to keep up with Nasty was also, well, nasty. But even with him, he was just a harder version of all the other bosses. Kind of like the story, going into further details about them is a genuine waste of time, and I probably shouldn't. Another issue I had is that the gameplay isn't varied. As fun as it was exploring all the levels, there's this sort of emptiness to them. You especially feel this once you've collected a majority of the gems and are looking for that last 50 to 60 value of treasure. You'll be charging around a map to no avail until you finally find a secret area, but the amount of time simply searching feels wasteful, and with no NPCs to assign you with additional tasks, you'll be stuck doing the same quest of collecting. I guess the speedways maybe provide a bit of a break from this, but they only make up about a quarter of the game, and some of them do feel a bit samey. I know the purpose of a collectathon is collecting things, and everything that I praised about the level designs and atmosphere still stand true, but they could have added something to expand on the core gameplay. I'll admit that by the Dracuise fight, I was already feeling exhausted. The gems and eggs could have been used for something like how in the sequels, moneybags force you to pay treasure, or in Psychonauts, the Psy cards could be redeemed to make Psy challenge markers. For the most part, Spyro the Dragon's items are just there for the sake of gathering them up. Especially the dragon eggs. After the Magic Crafter world, they just completely disappear. Why would you establish a collectible early on, and then forget about it into later levels? But at worst, these are first game issues anyway. So going back to the original question, has Spyro the Dragon aged well? To put it simply, yes. Even though Spyro the Dragon might not have the action-oriented gameplay of Crash Bandicoot, it still manages to make up for this with its ingenious level design that is rife with puzzles that must be resolved with the implementation of Spyro's moveset. And the thing is, I'm not sure if I'd consider myself to be an avid Spyro fan. While I did grow up with the old PS1 titles, I never really 100%ed them until I was around a junior in college, which was around 2019 to 2020. Maybe that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it adds a certain level of legitimacy to my statement considering it isn't tainted by rose-tinted glasses. But it's a bad thing because my limited knowledge on Spyro kind of shows. With all that being said, Spyro the Dragon is definitely one of those PS1 platformers that I'd wholeheartedly recommend next to the likes of Ape Escape and Abe's Odyssey. Although it's basic in nature, Spyro the Dragon still has enough going for it that it's a joy from start to finish. If you're willing to look past some crap bosses and a certain degree of repetition with the gameplay, you'll definitely have a blast with Spyro the Dragon. Whether it's running around enjoying each level's atmosphere to listening to Spyro's boisterous and snarky attitude, Spyro the Dragon is a PS1 game worthy of being in your 90s library. And that's all I have for you. Thanks for watching, hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.